Well, good afternoon, and welcome, thank you, and welcome everyone to Millsaps College and to the Madeline and James McMullen Hall here in the Selby and Richard McRae Christian Center. We're delighted to have you with us this afternoon. Hosting events like this is really in keeping with our commitment to active participation in our community and to supporting as partners the members of this Jackson family, really. So we're delighted to do this. As a matter of fact, this is part of kind of who we are. The fourth of our 5 goals in our new strategic plan says this about community engagement: to position the college as a place vital to our community and known for free, courageous, and bold academic discourse that is deeply informed by a Wesleyan tradition that values intellectual honesty, integrity, and civility. We think of ourselves as sort of a public square. So this is very much in keeping with that public square role of Millsaps College. It's also in keeping with our own challenges during water crises. We're here in Jackson, so when Jackson loses water, Millsaps College loses water. And my heart breaks for the thousands of families all over this community whose teenagers upstairs don't have toilets to flush or showers to use. And I've got 700 teenagers upstairs that don't have showers and toilets. So I'm really grateful to the leadership, to the opportunity we have to hear about the exciting things happening to address this important matter. So let me turn this over to my colleague, superstar Professor Louwanda Evans, who will introduce our guests today, our speakers, but also just want to say how much I enjoyed getting to know Mr. Henifin not long ago, how thoughtful he was in coming to Millsaps and sharing their plans, and also how wonderful it is to see my alum, Lamees, with us again. So thank you both.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Perigin. I'm Louwanda Evans. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. I'm also the chair of that department. And I am very pleased to be able to kind of moderate a discussion today between Mr. Henifin and Ted and Lamees.
Ted,
We've agreed to go by first names today.
Thank you.
So that's what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is start with a kind of a brief introduction of our guests, and then we're going to open the floor to have them kind of give their perspective of why it's really important to have this conversation, and then we will have some time for question and answers from our audience. This will be followed by a press briefing, so we will ask the press to hold their questions until that briefing so that we can have members of the community actually ask those questions. This is an incredibly important conversation for me as well. I am a resident of Jackson. I have been for 10 years. I have 2 children in the public school system, and so what's been happening with us is quite meaningful. And so trust me to kind of potentially ask some tough questions today. But really, it's sort of to get the conversation going. So I do want to start with introducing Mr. Henifin. Ted Henifin is the interim third-party manager of the City of Jackson's drinking water and the associated billing system, so it's kind of multifaceted. Ted was appointed by the federal courts to conduct the business necessary for a third-party company to achieve the objectives of the stipulated order. Henifin is a registered professional engineer before becoming a third-party manager. He began his career in 1982 as a civil engineer in the facilities planning division of the Navy Public Works Center in Norfolk. He has served as a senior engineer with the Norfolk Redevelopment and Housing Authority and as the deputy site manager of the Navy Public Works Center at Little Creek. Before this, Mr. Henifin worked as director of public works for the city of Hampton. Mr. Henifin also served on the National Association of Clean Water Agency boards. Lamees El-Sadek is a Jackson-based epidemiologist and activist focusing on the social and economic structures contributing to health disparities. She graduated from Millsaps, yay, welcome back, and the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. Currently, she is the Gates Millennium Scholar at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She focuses on the social and economic structures contributing to ethnic health disparities. Lamees aspires to serve in an avenue that integrates policy, education, healthcare, influences, and how these things influence to preserve human dignity. So please welcome our guests. So I'd like to give our panelists, and I'll start with you, Mr. Henifin, and then I'll move to you, Ms. Lamees, concerning why is this conversation important to have right now? So I'll give you just a couple of minutes, like why are we here talking about rate structures or rate changes and structural changes to our existing water system? And then, Lamees, I will ask you to talk about how you see this as impacting kind of social determinants of health or health inequalities. So I'll start here.
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks everyone for being here, and I feel like I'm spending a lot of time these days in various audiences, but maybe the first time without any technical folks around. So, the technical part of this is actually not going to be that hard. If that was the only part of this job that I had to come in and work on, life would be pretty easy. And especially in the light of the federal funding, the massive federal funding that was allocated to Jackson just before Christmas, which took a job that looked pretty impossible in November when I was appointed to one that looks very possible and relatively straightforward, thanks on the technical side. The challenge is really the people. It's always that way. If we didn't have to deal with people, us engineers would have a great world. But we've got a couple big challenges ahead of us, and one is, I've been dropped in from my life in Virginia and my history in the utility business to Jackson, trying to learn the people and the culture, but I'm not going to be here forever, and I'm immediately working on an exit strategy. And so when we talk about governance, it's about how do I extract myself from Jackson Water and leave it in a very functional, sustainable position going forward, not where it was before. And that's really the driving force for me to be having these discussions after only being in this position for 90 days. So I haven't been here long, haven't got a lot accomplished really, but I'm already thinking about how does Jackson move forward without an interim third-party manager, me, appointed by the court. So what's that future look like? Because if we can't define that future, I could be here forever, and frankly, I'm a little old for that, so it wouldn't get you down the road very far. So really motivated on what that future looks like, and so that's the main driver behind the conversation. And then the second part of that is to be sustainable going forward, we need to have a rate structure that supports the utility so it can stand on its own and it doesn't need one-time federal funding coming in mass doses. We need to find a way to create a utility that can survive on its own with its local revenue source. And this is where my background in utilities over the last many years, thanks for throwing that 1982 date out. I've been around utility and rate setting for a long time. And it's a challenge in this country because one, we've never really charged what water is worth for a variety of reasons. And two, most states, including Mississippi and Virginia where I am, have strong requirements about how rates are set by customer class. So there isn't a discrimination within customer class on utility rates. Good thing that everyone has to pay the same rate. You can't pick and choose. So if you're in a single, and when I say customer class, that means like a single family residential rate has to be applied the same for all single family residential water customers. Multifamily could be different, commercial could be different, but within that class, it all has to be the same. And so the problem we run into as utility leaders is you need to set that rate for everybody, but you've got not a homogeneous demographic in most communities. You've got people that have a lot of resources, and you've got people that don't have a lot, and a bunch of people in the middle. And we tend to try to set the rate so that it's affordable in the eyes of the utility folks for the people at the bottom 20% of the socio-economic demographic of your community. And when you determine affordability, and EPA's got lots of studies and guidance on determining affordability of utilities, and they say you're stressed if you're spending more than 4.5% of your income on your water and sewer bill. And often when we set these rates, we look at a median of that bottom quintile and we set the rate so it's 4.5% for the median, meaning the people that are below the median are paying 5, 6, 7, 8% of their income on water and sewer, and that is atrocious in this court. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum, they don't even know they're paying a bill. They've got it set in auto pay. And I'm not talking about the wealthy, I'm talking about middle class with means. They can afford their water in this country without even thinking about it. Most of them don't open their bill, they've got it set in auto pay. So the challenge here is we've got an opportunity. Jackson's got lots of challenges. We've got the opportunity maybe to do something very different, to try to create an equitable rate that still meets all those requirements. And that's what we're trying to figure out, is how to do that. And so the proposals I put on the table are based on a property attribute as opposed to a consumptive-based rate, meaning you really don't care how much water you use, and we'll talk about the whys there at some point if you want to, but water isn't the cost. We get it for free from the reservoir. If you want to get your own water, just bring a bucket up, fill it up, bring it home. You know, you can get that same water for free. We have to add a little bit of chemical and energy to it to put it in the pipe so it's available in front of your house. And if you weren't in Jackson, it would be available in front of your house 24/7, 365, every day of the year, and you wouldn't think twice about it. Jackson a little unique because we haven't delivered on that, but we will, and soon that'll be a distant memory. So it's all about the infrastructure and the people to get the water to you. It's not about the actual cost of the water we pull out of the reservoir. And so we need to throw that model on its head a little bit and see if there's a different way to charge where everyone might pay close to the same amount of their income on water. And if everyone did that, you don't have to really impact the lower end of the spectrum, and everyone pays what's affordable for everybody. And that's where the property attribute piece falls in nicely, because while it's a generalization, and I understand that there's lots of challenges here, typically, if you live in an expensive house, you've got more resources, you've got higher income. If you live in a large house, you have more resources, more income. Again, generalization. We can actually prove there is some correlation there, but that's sort of the basis of this, is a property attribute-based rate so that everyone gets water that they can afford. And with that, my counterpart here, Lamees.
So easy to follow that, right?
It's easy, you got that.
So also just start off by saying that's something that's maybe a bit unrelated, but about 36 hours ago, I either fractured or sprained my ankle playing soccer.
It wasn't a water-related injury.
And it wasn't on the land of Jackson, so Jackson's not the problem, but I want to say that I think my foot's in solidarity with the city of Jackson, because we're both going through rehab right now. So, I love to simplify things. So whenever I think about the Jackson water problem, the Jackson water crisis, I ask myself, well, what is the problem? What are we trying to solve? And in public health, we learn a term called wicked problems. And wicked problems are something that are not easily solved or logically solved with one solution, because there's lots of contributing factors that created this wicked problem. In the city of Jackson, and when we talk about the water issue, we have human resource issue, we have infrastructure issue, we have financing issue, we have political issues, we have time, the problem of time, and so much more that we can get into. So this is not an easy solution. This is why we have Ted here to solve it for us. But there's also this issue of principle and of values. And whenever you're trying to solve a wicked problem, there's often many different ways that you can address it. And this is why it's so important that you have your values established at the forefront of the conversation so that you know what you're working towards and you know what you're working for. And so whenever we bring up this term called water equity, what does that even mean? So we think we know, so everyone knows that everyone should have water. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement about that. Even at the international level, in 2015, 193 different nations signed on to the Sustainable Development Goals, which establishes a list of goals that all countries should try to achieve by the year 2030 and beyond in order to continue progressing as a society and an international community. On the a national level, in 1974, I believe it was, when we signed the Safe
Drinking Water Act.
Drinking
Very
Water
good.
Act.
You weren't born yet.
Not quite. And that is enforced by the EPA. And that also establishes very similar criteria to what we're trying to do with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which is try to make water clean, safe, hygienic, affordable, and reliable for everyone, no matter how rich, wealthy, how rich, poor, rural, urban, it doesn't matter. All of those criteria should be available to every single American. And even if you get down to the state level, I'm sure we can find laws or ordinances that affirm the same thing. So the issue is not, we're not arguing about should water be available to everyone. We're discussing who should pay for the water, number one, and who should govern the water, number two. And there's so many different ways you can address that. I have my personal opinions, but maybe we should allow those questions to be part of the discussion and conversation.
What is your personal opinion on rates? What do you think about doing something different that's not based on consumption?
So let's start off at a principle level.
Okay.
I believe that anyone who is governed has the right to have a voice in who governs them. And water distribution falls under a system of governance. So as just a flat out principle, I think the people of Jackson should have an input on what their governance structure should be. More so that they pay into the system that distributes the water. And the fact that it's a value or it's a principle that water is available to everyone, regardless of what your socio-economic background is, means that the governance structure should be one that has the value of affording this utility to everyone. If the governance structure is in opposition to these people's interests, then we have a problem with the governance structure. So that's just on principle. That's just on basis of principle. But if we go into the rate structure and this very technical conversation of how do we pay for it, what's happening in Jackson is not an anomaly. Jackson may be one of the first cities that's receiving all this media attention and has received all of this funding. But a lot of cities have gone before us that have faced these issues, and many cities will come after us to face this issue. And I think it's a really great opportunity for us to be innovative and for us to actually be a leader, a city and a state leader in how we can look at different ways to solve a wicked problem that maybe other municipalities haven't considered in the past. So one of the points that I've heard in this water conversation is, well, all cities use meters. Why does Jackson have to be different? Well, just because everyone does it doesn't mean that it's right or it's the smartest or wisest or most economical thing to do. And something that maybe worked 30, 40, 50 years ago may not necessarily work moving forward, especially considering our migration, moving in and out, and all the socioeconomic realities around the racial background of our city and our economic opportunities and just what life in the South or in rural America looks like.
I'd like to kind of chime in, I'm sorry, because we're talking about rates, but we hadn't shown y'all the rates. Can we take a few steps back?
Sure.
Let's get into the weeds of this.
Let's get into the weeds. So this was the financial plan, and that was one of the reasons that we're here is on the short term, it's to develop some alternative rate strategies. And so the one we're focused on initially was around, I said property attribute. This screenshot is right off of the Hinds County Assessor's property attribute or property maps. So you can go to the parcel viewer. So if you went online, went to Hinds County, you can go to the parcel viewer, you put in your address, and you can see exactly what records they've got. And this is one piece of it. And there's a TV land, that's true value land, and there's a TV improvement, which is your true value of the improvement on the property. And that's what we're using as a basis for calculating a property attribute rate, rate. And so what happens is, again, that's published information in the assessor's data. We would pull that out, multiply it by a factor to get your actual rate. And then we could use other things in this same data set, which includes building size, which we've done some analysis on. I didn't show that example here, but you can see that there's acres in the GIS, there's other pieces, the land and assessments. But again, we've landed on these two, true value land, true value improvement for this analysis and example. And this is what happens when you take that data, all the parcels in Jackson that are single family residential coded. And again, we haven't scrubbed the data. This is coming right out of the assessor's information. And the bottom, you'll see property value in thousands of dollars, and that's property value is that true value land plus true value improvement. And that ends up in these thousands of dollars at the bottom. So down here it's 1 to 10,000, and at the other end it's over 500 and some thousand, 250,000. And this is how it lays out with a number of properties that fall in these values. And so 37%, the most of our properties fall in the $30,000 to $40,000 range between when you add up the true value and land value. And I know that seems really low. This is assessor's data. It's not market price. It's not what your house would sell for today. And it's not actually what they assess it on, but we weren't going to go into the whole how Mississippi assesses property. This is what they report in the assessor's data as the true value. And so this is a histogram of the number of properties that fall into these value ranges. And so this means that 59% of the properties, this is cumulative, 59% of the properties in Jackson are at or below the $50,000 to $60,000 range. That's a big chunk of your property is, 59% is in this under 50,000 to 60,000 range. So all these cumulative is 59%. And you start looking further down and it starts dropping off, which intuitively I think everyone knows that Jackson's housing stock isn't as valuable from an assessment standpoint as another community might pick, say, San Francisco, where the numbers here would start in the millions. So this is reflective of Jackson's data, and the orange lines represent every house up to about the 160,000 range. So 92% of the properties in Jackson are assessed. Again, this assessed value is less than 160,000. The other 8%, the blue bars, are the more expensive houses, and that turns out to be somewhere above 160,000 and above. And what we did in this analysis is we set the rate with a cap, because even though it makes sense that everyone should share equally in the percent they throw in here, it gets to the point where it's just frankly ridiculous to extend that to high value properties and have people getting $4,000 a month water bills. So that doesn't play well. So we had to pick a number that we thought was manageable. And so we set a cap at $150, which is roughly that $160,000 parcel. So if you have a house that the true value land, true value improvement added up to 160, you'd be capped out at $150 a month, which I know sounds a little high. But everyone else is paying close to what they were paying before or much less when you get into lower value properties. And in Jackson, again, 60% of our properties are below the 50 to 60,000 range. So if you look at it one other way, the same data, 9%, about 5,000 of the parcels total, single family parcels in Jackson, would be at that cap. 37%, 21,000 single family residential parcels would be paying $40 or less a month for water and sewer, which becomes affordable. And it gets even less if you're in a less expensive property. And so that's really the basis of the proposal that I've thrown out there for the discussion point. And there's going to be people that are going to be paying $150 and they're going to be upset about that. There's going to be people that are paying a lot less than what they pay today and they aren't going to be upset about that. But I think on the whole, when you think of the demographics of Jackson, 25% of our population is at or below the poverty line. And I'm saying 21,000 single-family residents, 2.78 people per house in Jackson puts that in the 65,000 range as far as people. Way more than the poverty level that would be getting an affordable water and sewer bill. And that's sort of the crux of the argument or the proposal. And there it shows some examples. If you had a $30,000 assessed value, that's the true value improvement, true value land. So I know you're all thinking no one lives in a $30,000 house. That probably has a market value of $70,000, but in the assessment it's at 30. The water bill will be around $30 a month. And then a little bit, and I'm not really focused on the commercial side, but we can talk about that as well, that we cap that. We use the exact same formula, and we cap that based on property value. Commercial property, much higher value, so their bills are going to be higher, but they would be capped at $600 a month. So that's the proposal that we were talking about.
Okay.
So Ted, how dependent is this model on stability of the current population, assuming that you don't have upper middle class or wealthier families leaving Jackson and going to the suburbs?
Great point, and based on the numbers, it's because it's only 5,000 parcels at that higher end. We haven't done the sensitivity analysis, but I don't think you'd have to lose a lot of those before we'd really impact the overall revenue generation. But that is a concern. If we had a significant number out there that were in that capped range that we thought we could lose, or if it was a small number and a big part of the revenue, that could be a problem. But it's I think a manageable number at 5,000, and it doesn't make up a significant part of the revenue.
As a third-party person coming into the city, you've talked about kind of governing structures and things like that. How can we, see that at least control of the water remains at the city level? Like, have you kind of thought about that in terms of the plan that you're putting forward, in terms of who's going to manage this as you create your exit strategy?
Yeah. So, I think I'm of the opinion the asset should be owned by the city. A lot of communities have tried over the years to sell their assets to a private entity, and they turn over total control to the private entity. I am not a fan of that. It works in many communities, but often that cash that's provided for the asset at the beginning, the water system, and we could argue whether there's any asset value to the existing Jackson water system, but we'll go there. That cash is burned off into sort of current one-time desires, and so you've wasted that societal resource that generations of Jacksonians have paid for as the system has been developed and maintained and became what it is today. And so the idea of preserving that as a public asset is foundational in my mind. So the proposal here, the city still owns the assets of the water system, but they're contracting with an entity to operate them. Because the city has shown, and not alone, Jackson is not unique in this, that municipal government is not overly effective and efficient in all areas. And you need a regular, I think you pointed out, Lamees, we have human resource issues, we've had just financial resource issues, we've had technical and political. To the extent we can remove something as vital for public health as water from direct political influence, I think there's a real benefit there, and there's many examples across the country where other structures have been used, and I don't, almost hesitant to talk about authorities because this has been twisted quite a bit with the politics around creating an authority to run the water system. That has worked very well in many communities. Typically, an authority is created when you have a strong central water system in a larger community, and you've got failing smaller systems that no longer have the ability to maintain their system. Their young people are moving out of their community. They can't attract talent. They can't get people to stay. And so those systems start falling apart as the folks that were holding them together age out of their own communities. And so often, a strong central regional utility will reach out and provide assistance. This may start with technical assistance, or it may start with loaning people or assets. and advice and guidance and technical and financial and management advice. And then ultimately, the smaller utility says, you know, we don't need this hassle and you're doing a great job, just take our utility. And that's sort of the way regional entities have been created right across the country. We aren't in that model here. You know, unfortunately, Jackson's the large centralized system is not the strength of the region. And to think that a small system has the capacity to help in any way or fashion doesn't really make sense. You know, and not only that, Jackson, and to get technical, we're the only surface watered utility in the central part of Mississippi, one of only 4 in Mississippi. So we can't reach out to a neighbor or say in a neighboring community in Madison and say, you know, send us an operator to help us out. Their operators on their well water plants are not licensed to operate the surface water plants. So we've got very different water systems, very different challenges, and it doesn't make sense. I'd support a regional entity if Jackson was strong and we had failing systems around us. I think it'd be a great idea. I don't think it's a great solution here. Create your own authority, municipal authority within Jackson. That's an option I discuss as a potential. But we still have a lot of politics around who would we trust to run that authority and who gets appointed to be that authority board. Little concerned about that, just given the current history. Maybe someday we get past this and we can change from a political standpoint. And so that's why I've really been looking for a different model, cooperative, nonprofit, something that could potentially build confidence among the population that this is a way to lead us and ensure that our value is water for everyone, and we could create an entity that had that stated value.
I've been really encouraged. You've only been here 3 months, and the people that you've surrounded yourself with are people who know Jackson. So the first 2 hires you've had were from the city of Jackson, with a great history, great track record of being committed to the people of Jackson. Your communications group is a minority-owned communications group that knows Jackson very well. So it's very obvious that you're invested in leaving Jackson and leaving Jacksonians to run the city of Jackson once you leave. With that being said, what ideas do you have to train and motivate the next generation of water sanitation workers and to develop the workforce that has been part of the problem?
It has. My good friends that ran the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission for many, many years, and again, as part of a national board for the National Clean Water Associations, I've gotten the benefit of really making deep friendships across the country in water and wastewater. And we've got some amazing utilities doing some amazing work. And San Francisco really was on the very leading edge of what we call community benefit. And the idea was you actually put some evaluation into your contracts to require the people that are going to be benefiting from the millions of dollars you're spending in the community to give back to the community. And most, believe it or not, contractors and consultants want to do that anyway, and this kind of structure builds that in. And we've gotten Jacobs to run our water plant. They're a national company, multi-billion-dollar company. That's all they do is, on the operation side, is maintain and operate plants. They don't own them. They're not in that ownership model. And they've got a deep bench. They run 250 facilities across the country. They've got great experience, and they know they need people.
And their preferred hiring strategies to hire local.
And they hired everybody that was in the water plant, the 2 water plants that wanted to work for them. There were some that chose a different path, and then a few didn't quite get through all they're a big corporation. They've got background requirements and education requirements that a couple of our folks didn't make it through, and we're still haven't given up on it. But they've hired a number of local folks, and they continue to look for local folks to fill out the rest of their staff. And they're going to be paying on average, I think among our staff, the city staff they hired, was a $6 an hour increase from where they were, and many of them much more than that. So they pay not just regional comparable and competitive salaries, they pay salaries that work so these people could get up and go to another community. Not that we want anyone to leave, but for upward mobility, sometimes you have to go somewhere else. And you take that skill set and that experience at Jacobs, and you could go get another job within Jacobs at one of their other facilities. So long story to say, they're very focused on workforce development. We don't have a firm fix on what that looks like. We did create a scholarship already with Hines Community College, sorry Millsaps, but we partnered with them to make sure we had a JPS student that could get a scholarship for semester at a time, and you can get up to 4 awards, and they could get a associate's or pursue a course of study in a STEM program that would lead ultimately, we hope, to a career in water. We aren't directing them to that, but that would be the ideal. So we've already got that scholarship set up. Jacobs is going to contribute. We've got some Jackson Water money, some personal donations are in there, so we actually can award the first scholarship this spring. And so that's a start. We've got plenty of experience across the country with folks that have reached into high schools for some apprentice-type programs and education programs around careers in water. So I think we've got, what we're bringing in as we bring some of these national firms in to help. They're going to come in with their ideas that they've seen across the country on how we can build some better workforce development. But we don't have the answers all yet, and we'll be involving the higher education and the JPS and how that shapes up over the next several months.
Okay, I do want to leave some time for Q&A from the audience, but I appreciate a couple of things that you said, and one is this notion of equity, and that is, equity and equality are two different things, and sometimes we do need kind of this equitable distribution. But that said, what would be the alternative if this proposed rate structure doesn't happen to people in Jackson? Because we do know that some of our residents are struggling to pay those bills.
Yeah, we do. And so the default at the moment for most, the U.S. has failed water and people. They don't recognize it as needed for public health. We don't have a social safety net, a national social safety net for water. We've got it for food. We actually have a little bit for heating. We've got it, retirement is obviously a social safety net with Social Security, but water, you're on your own to pay your water bill. You might have to go to a local nonprofit or a church or some other folks to get some help, but we don't have a national safety net for water, and we need it. And so utilities got together and over the last several years have pushed for that, and the best that came out of that was during the CARES Act, one of those pieces of legislation, there's a pilot program for a low-income water assistance program, which provides funding to the utility to pay balances for people that can't afford to pay their bills. So they had to qualify. There's income qualifications. To make it easy, there's this company, Promise, we're working with locally that actually does a match with our account information and the state's SNAP or LIHEAP registration. So people that are already receiving comparable benefits for other things don't have to do anything more than basically do nothing. If they have an outstanding balance and they qualify based on this customer match that's done behind the scenes, we can get LIHEAP money, LIWAP money in this case, low-income water assistance money, from the federal government. That program is going to end in September. It's not very well funded. So there goes the end of the federal safety net for water, only because so many states were challenged with how to implement it that they're not using their money, they're giving it back. Mississippi's working, we're getting there, and I think we're having an opportunity to pull down more money over the coming months. So no social safety net means utilities have to come up with their own customer assistance programs, many of which are legislatively banned in many states. They won't allow you to take ratepayer money and put it into a customer assistance program and give it out to someone who can't afford to pay their bill. There are many barriers to how do you assist customers without using other nonprofit, philanthropic, community organizations to try to help. There's not a good answer right now.
The other final question that I sort of have, and then we'll open this up. we finally got water back, but then we had messed up pipes.
It's debatable. We'll talk about it.
Those pipes were kind of messed up. That's my opinion. They broke on my street anyway. But, and this may be something that you'll have in future conversations, because these conversations will continue throughout the community, but I do want infrastructural things to also be considered. We can have water, but is it safe coming through our pipes?
Sure. So
Is it,
yeah, and
clean?
building that confidence back in the water is going to be a huge challenge. The system will be fixed long before we'll have confidence rebuilt to the level it needs to be. The water's safe to drink, but I've talked to community members who haven't wanted or chosen to drink tap water for decades. It's not something that happened just yesterday. And across the country, I think right now about 32% of the population regularly drinks the water from their tap. So it's not, again, not unique to Jackson. So we've got this whole confidence trust building thing, but I can tell you that the tests that have been done on the water, both by EPA, our regular ongoing test, water is great. Nothing wrong with our water. It is fabulous. Now, pipes. Let's talk about the pipes, because it does have to get to your house. So you've got 110 miles of small diameter pipes in Jackson. And when we say small, the standards by today, a water pipe going down your street shouldn't be any smaller than 6 inches in diameter. The 109 miles we have are mostly 2-inch diameter pipes. They're galvanized. And what that does is one, creates localized pressure problems, because you imagine you're sharing your water with all your neighbors coming out of just a little 2-inch pipe as opposed to a 6-inch pipe is what should be there. So it creates localized pressure. It also creates discoloration. There's lots of issues around the 2-inch pipes. The water's still safe to drink, but I lived on a street, I do continue to live on the street in Hampton, Virginia. We were served by a 2-inch pipe until within the last 10 years. I don't remember exactly when it was replaced. And our water was discolored on a regular basis. And I'm director of public works for the city of Hampton at the time, but we didn't have anything to do with the drinking water. That was our neighboring community that provided that to our house. So every time the water was discolored, I got a call from my lovely wife. Call your buddies in Newport News and tell them the water is bad again. So we would draw a bath for our children and it would be brown, but the water would be safe. But it's, as soon as that 2-inch pipe was replaced, we have never had the problem again. So I'm confident that my focus is on, we need to get those small diameter pipes out. And the big part of where we're going to spend our time is going down streets. And I know you all love the condition of your streets in Jackson because they are unique. There's no doubt about it. We're going to have to tear those up from side to side, replace the water line, replace the sewer line, and pave it back nice and smooth. So I'm sorry that we have to do that. But so you get the added, maybe not benefit of eliminating your potholes and your wheeze and your bumps and all the stuff. But it's going to take a while. 100 miles, at best, we might get 10 to 15, maybe 20 miles done a year. So we're 5 to 10 years from finishing that. But laser focused on making that happen, and that's going to make your water better.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a quick question?
You can ask me a long, slow question.
This is a little bit further down, but once you do start replacing pipes, do you have an idea of how you would prioritize?
Oh, that's going to be fun. Yeah. Maybe we'll do a whole study on that. Because someone's not going to be happy when they're the 100th mile, right?
Yeah.
10 years from now. So we're looking at a combination of factors because we're talking water and sewer line on these streets. So we're going to look at sewer records to see if we're having regular problems there with overflows and problems. And I don't have anything to do with sewer yet. That might change in the next few weeks. But so we'd look for sewer records. We look for water repair records because Louwanda says her pipe gets broken a lot in front of her house. So we would take those, and then we were going to actually look for the communities that really meet the social justice and environmental justice criteria and start there. So kind of it's going to be a matrix of priorities to figure that out. So we'll definitely want where the sewer and water issues are the worst, and then we'll overlay the communities that fit the social and environmental justice criteria. So there may be jumping around a little bit till we get the technical priorities done, and then we can start working more on the social priorities.
So it's not who calls you the most, or
Yeah, so
how-
please,
where the
get that
attorneys
message out.
are
Exactly.
from, or
There'll be a lot of accusations.
We're going to believe his word about equity. It's not always about the phone calls, right?
That's right.
So we have two folks here that are going to provide you with an opportunity to ask questions. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Okay.
Yeah.
And then right behind.
Real quick, can you talk about water pressure? Because, our communities, our campus communities here, we've had to cancel classes how many times in the last couple of years because A, we don't have water or the pressure's not sufficient.
That's a really misunderstood part of Jackson's problem from the national level and from all the snake oil salespeople that I've been dealing with, is that it's a water quality issue. It's not a water quality issue. There was one last summer, but by and far it's a pressure issue. And we are actually making serious progress already in addressing that, just through, as Lamees pointed out, I did cherry pick the finest that Jackson had as far as water and public works goes with Jordan Hillman. She's an amazing problem solver, and she has developed a method at which she goes out and tests water on either side of a valve by opening a hydrant, checking for chlorine, checking for alkalinity, things that are unique to both of our water plants slightly, and she can determine whether the valve's open or closed based on, or at least come to a great hypothesis as to whether it's open or closed based on those water tests. Open the valve, and we're finding so many closed valves. And everyone said, well, why is that? It goes back to lack of resources and expertise on the water system over many years. We have a break. When our crews have responded to the break, they have to try to isolate it, to get the water off so you can actually dig down and fix it. They start closing valves, but they don't have really good maps or records of which valve does what. And then they don't have a modern system where you would have a handheld tablet or a phone, and you'd enter, as you closed a valve, which valve you closed. And so you could go back 2 days later when you finish the repair and you're cleaning things up and remember every valve you closed. Without that accurate record, you don't go back and open all the right valves necessarily. And we've got now, it would appear, many years of closing valves that didn't get reopened. And as we're finding them, we're finding the system pressure, the tanks, everything is operating better today because of Jordan's work over the last 3 weeks. We do have a contractor on board to do every valve in the city, and they're starting their work, and they're here actually working with Jordan until we can get them set loose on a more productive long-term strategy, which is happening as we speak, essentially. So understanding the distribution system will give us a clear understanding of what we need to do to maintain pressure at all times, but we're already moving in that direction. And so I'd say by this fall, we'll know exactly what the capital needs would be. Is it additional valves, additional control valves? Is it another tank? We will know the solution, and then it'll be a matter of starting the construction to build those solutions. But I think pressure will become basically a thing of the past. Example two is response really helps. Last night we had a major break, couldn't get to it, had to isolate it. We had about 100 folks in Jackson didn't have water last night, but that kept the rest of the city from losing water. And so it's making those decisions, triaging what's going on, understanding how you can isolate it quickly to keep the whole city from going down is critical. And again, we've got now some really brilliant problem solvers that are making those decisions in real time, and that'll just continue to get better over the years ahead.
Hi, I am a retired state employee, and I have been retired 10 years, so I'm talking back in 2013, excuse me. It was bragged at my department that I worked for at the end of this street, right before you get to the highway, that we had not paid a water bill in 40 years. Are we finding that throughout the state, and is the state still connected to it, and why are we not charging the state?
So I could spend the rest of our afternoon on billing issues. Suffice to say, the billing system is a disaster. I don't know if it started before the Siemens contract in 2015. I think there were rumors that we had problems even before then. Then we've compounded that with failed efforts through the Siemens contract to change the meters out. Then we had We're now trying to add new meters without having got, we've got 4 different kinds of meters out. Some are red, some are communicating. They all translate into a third party that then puts it into the billing system, and everyone's pointing fingers at each other. It's a mess. But one of the beauties of this concept of a property attribute-based billing system, we can clean that up quickly. Everyone will know what their bill is on a monthly basis. It'll be the same. It doesn't depend on reading a meter and trying to get the complex parts of our system fixed. We could just move ahead quickly and implement something that would generate the revenue.
But are we charging the state?
We're missing, we are charging some, there's no doubt. I've had a long conversation with how messed up some of their bills are, but we've got at least 6,500 improved parcels. Going back to assessor's data, we took the assessor's data, looked for parcels in Jackson that have improvements on them. So there was a value for improvement, meaning there's a building of some sort on the house. 6,500 parcels don't match to an account in our system. One of the priorities we now have is to go put eyes on all 6,500 of those and say, why don't they have an account? Are they a water user, and should they have an account? And there's a lot, I'm hearing this anecdotally throughout the community, not just state facilities. The apartment building I live in on Lakeland Drive, built in 2016. It's me and 250 med students, so I raise the average age. But the good news is they don't watch the news, so they don't know who I am. But that building has never gotten a water bill. And the owners have come to me and said, we're trying, tell us what we owe, we'll pay it. So I've got a lot of folks out there, we're trying to figure out how to get to that, to establish an account. And for those that want to be good stewards and give us the back payment, we'll be trying to get that. But there are state buildings that are falling into that as well.
Great question.
Yes, hello, and thank you. Thank you for your work, and thank you for this conversation. As I know you well know, there has been a lot of movement at the state legislature to shift, move resources, limit what the city can do. I'd love to hear what you think the impact of that might be, and ideally, what kind of relationship should we be having to make this work?
I think maybe the last question you just said, what time? It's from an outsider's perspective, it's a very challenging to understand relationship between the state and the city. I'm sure there's lots of factors and lots of history, but for someone that dropped into Jackson in December to see the state actually start dropping legislation to try to kill things I'm trying to do to improve the system before I even had a chance to barely think them out was a bit of a shock. And so, I'm not overly reacting to anything that they're throwing out there. I've expressed my concern on a few of the bills. I've had some lengthy discussions with the lieutenant governor, the speaker, the governor. I don't need to be having those conversations. I need to be getting work done. But anyway, we've had a lot of conversations. I'm all about creative problem solving. So whatever cards I'm dealt, I'll figure out how we can play them from there. But because I don't think it's a good use of my time to try to influence where the legislation's going to go. I'll just figure out how to work it when it comes around. But it's a sad state in my mind. The capital city has this sour of a relationship with their state legislature that this is their home for 3 months out of the year. They should be proud of their capital, and they should be doing everything they can to help it. And I just don't get it. I really just don't get it.
Thank you. Sorry. So with this proposed rate structure, what political processes would you have to go through for this to be implemented, like permanently?
Great question. Technically, if I figure out the legalities, and there's a lot of smart lawyers working on that, the stipulated order that Judge Wingate signed is a federal order, and it sounds really terrible, but it gives me really, really broad authority, probably more than I'd give myself. And so I only answer to the judge. So theoretically, there's a process in the order that I could propose this rate structure to the city, and the city would have to consider it. But if they didn't do it, I could just do it anyway. So I'm not that person, I don't think. But we'll have to see how it all plays out. But I really don't believe that. That's the reason I want to do these community meetings. That's the reason we're doing this. That's the reason we're going to do outreach over the next several weeks with a multiple number of community meetings where people are going to sit down and really try to help me understand what they like about a rate structure, what they would like about a governance structure. So I'm not doing this uninformed. Now, I had to put this proposal out 60 days after the order was signed. That did not allow time for community engagement. So I'm sort of now coming back to community engagement after I had to throw a stake out in the sand to kind of reveal what I was thinking about. But maybe that's going to be a good thing. But thank you.
We had one more. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I guess mine is a two-part question for you, Ted, and also our analysts.
Lamees. Did I get it right?
I'm really tired of analysts with the City of Jackson and data analytics. I guess my thing is, and I'm also the ASJAN Vice President of the Association of South Jackson Neighborhoods. When you're looking at your model, it's based upon future value versus present value versus property value. And unfortunately, if you did the Census Bureau study on the economics of Jackson, it's based upon present value. If I came in and bought up everything, the property value go up. So it's an interesting rate based upon what someone assess value on. From a policy standpoint, I want to ask your counterpart, this is a town that's a college town, capital Mississippi, has all the workings that can get everything done, but doesn't because of the policies or politics. What in the future, because right now you're looking at workers. I also represented the city workers, which the minimum wage is not even a living wage. So you now coming in paying $180 an hour, whereas that person only made $13 an hour with the city. Now, for sustainability reasons, what is the intermediate and long-term goals to try to fix some of those social ills? And I want to know what her take on it is. Since it's a college town that we train them up, then they leave.
Lamees, you want to deal with the social issue first? And I'll talk about the property value.
Yeah, I mean, that's a wicked problem.
By definition, it is a wicked problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a college town, but it's a lot more than a college town, too. And it's our capital city, and anyone who cares about America, not just Mississippi, should really want Mississippi and the city of Jackson to succeed right now. In the United States of America, we shouldn't have a capital city with a failing water system. So I'm really interested to see how this rate structure will pan out. My main caveat is a lot of these properties may have not seen a water bill for a really long time, even if they fall at the lowest end of that quartile. And so for these homes, to us, it may not seem like a large monthly expense, but to them, they may not have much disposable income at all. And to your point about a lack of a safety net for the water system, I think it's important that if we're going to put this rate structure in place and hope for long-term growth and long-term revenue, we should also have a plan for a safety net for the households that may not be able to afford this. And that should be part of the conversations that we have as we proceed throughout Jackson.
The assumption also that the rich are those who have a large property, also that they pay on time. That's an assumption because of property value.
There's plenty of people not paying their bills. I think it crosses all demographics. But to your property value, one of the nice parts about tying the water rate to the property value is theoretically, as you said, economics over time, property value should increase. The assessment should be in a normal environment, and that's pretty common. It may take longer in some communities than others, but over time, property value increases in a stable economy. Fair? I mean, kind of. I'm sure we can find examples. But if you tie your water rate to that, you may never have to change the rate. What we're multiplying against the property value may never have to be changed again, because the economy should grow at about the same rate at which our costs are growing.
I guess I look at the consumption portion, like buying a van versus a big truck. I'm using this amount of water, but using your model, I have to pay based on the value of my truck, not the cost of my gas.
There's so many things that we pay for that aren't directly connected to our use. That's what makes democracy what it is. That's what makes society what it is. It's not perfect. We all pay for schools. Not all of us have children. We all pay for trash. Some people put out tons of trash every day. Some people only put out a bit. So we're just stuck in this water has to be based on consumption mindset. But so many other things that are for society we pay for without even giving it much thought, because it's all about a community that's supporting their other members of their community. That's what we're here for. I mean, we should turn there to exactly to our sociology and anthropology questions, because if we aren't helping each other as a community, what are we here for?
And part of the point that Ted has made in the past is the actual cost of us consuming water is very small in comparison to the cost of producing water or delivering water. And if we're looking, there's a lot of factors in play, and if we're looking at maintaining governance of the water system within the city of Jackson, maintaining revenues from the water system within the city of Jackson, then that has to be accounted for. This fixed overhead cost that for so long the city has just gotten into further and further and further debt, because as a society, as a community, we haven't been contributing. No, I'm not putting blame on the community or on anyone. I'm trying to think of long-term solutions to maintain governance of the water system within the city of Jackson.
Okay, we have time for. Okay.
I know that Jackson's been facing a problem with losing some days 30 million gallons of water a day. I'm just confused about how this proposed structure would discourage overconsumption and lead to even more problems of losing so much water and then causing pressure problems, causing other problems down the line.
Sure. So the 30 million gallons is probably a pretty good estimate of how much we lose every day, but it's being lost in front of your meters. So it's not getting to the people. They aren't wasting it. We're wasting it. It's coming out in all sorts of places we haven't found yet. We're working that issue too. Jordan's on the trail. We're going to find those leaks. We won't find them all, but we'll find a significant amount. And so we produce 45 million gallons of water a day between the two plants, the fuel plant and the Curtis plant. If we could find just 10 million gallons of the 30, 1/3 of the leaks, we could close the fuel plant and save a lot of money on an annual basis. Because we can provide all of the city's needs. We should be able to provide all the city's needs from half of the Curtis plant. So the goal is to find the leaks, button them up. The reason that consumption and waste behind the meter, where you would be using it, and why that isn't a concern in Jackson's case in particular, one, your water-rich area, you get a lot of rain. I mean, and you get water just out of the air all summer long. So you've got no real water shortages in Mississippi. You got a lot of water. So conservation at that point becomes just an issue around people maybe irrigating their yards or using a little bit too much water. We'll save more by finding leaks than we could save through conservation efforts over the next generation. You just can't conserve that much water you'd be conserving 100% of the water you use to try to get to 15 million gallons a day overall usage. I mean, it's just unfathomable how much water we're losing, and you couldn't get anywhere near that with conservation. But conservation is going to happen naturally. It's already happened through regulation on shower heads, low-flow toilets, water-efficient appliances. The average consumer in the United States, water consumer, uses 88 gallons per day per person. And many are getting much lower than that. And not because they're focused on conservation or the water price has priced conservation. It's because of these technological advances in water using appliances and fixtures. And the national, and I'd say international, consciousness of water as a precious resource has risen significantly over the last 20 years. The fact that you're asking that question, it wouldn't have probably even been on anyone's mind 20 years ago. So people in general are better stewards of water, and they don't make that decision because they think this is going to cost me an extra buck. They make it because, go back to maybe our societal and community argument, that's the right thing to do for our planet, it's the right thing to do for our community. So.
Okay, I have a few questions. So you said that the water quality, like the water itself, is great quality, but like ever since I moved to Jackson, like my first college roommate like warned me not to drink the tap water because it's like not good for me or whatever. And I've read a lot of articles on how the lead poisoning that children in Jackson have gotten from drinking this water. And how like there's been multiple instances of boil water notices in Jackson, and since communities in Jackson are so used to boiling their water, they think it helps their water, but there's like a known neurotoxin that increases in concentration when water is being boiled. So then when you drink boiled water, it's worse because there's a toxin that is there that wasn't there before it was boiled. And so I'm suspicious of like the water quality itself because there are a lot of children who are suffering from lead poisoning.
So can I address the lead issue, and then maybe I'll turn to Luis about the rest of the public health issues around water. On the lead issue, I don't know any statistics around children actually having increased lead levels in Jackson compared to any kind of control population. But what I do know is in 2015, as part of the lead and copper rule, which is an EPA regulation, water systems have to sample water quarterly from a set number of houses. And so the houses were selected across the city, and those folks know who they are, and they get a knock on the door every quarter. They get a sample bottle set, and there's a procedure. They get up the next morning, they have to flush their kitchen sink, the same place they get the sample every time, for a certain number of seconds, and then they fill the sample bottles up, and they seal them, and they give them back to our folks who send them off to a lab to be tested. And that's a requirement of every community water system based on the lead and copper rule. And so we sample those same places quarter after quarter. We've had one action level exceedance, meaning, and you can probably talk a lot more about health, but EPA regulations set an action level of various contaminants, and then there's a health advisory level. And between those two, obviously, you get an action level exceedance, you need to take action to prevent ever reaching the health concern. We can all argue whether those are set appropriately, but that's done by the federal government with a lot of science and a lot of background. We had the action level exceedance during our testing in one quarter in 2015, and that required Jackson to commit to doing enhanced corrosion control, meaning, we all heard about Flint. Flint was a problem where they didn't have the appropriate corrosion control when they changed water source, and they leached lead out of the pipes in their system and poisoned a lot of children. That was Flint. That is not Jackson. Jackson had one exceedance in 2015 and has not had another action level exceedance since that point in time. So we've conducted quarterly testing since then and have never had a problem. Now what we do have is every piece of paper we send out about our water says the water's not safe or not recommended for pregnant women and children under 5. Now why do we have to say that if we don't have a problem with our water? Because we didn't finish implementing the enhanced corrosion control plan. So until we finish that, we have to keep that disclaimer on our water, even though we've tested it for the last 8 years and have not had a problem on any of those tests. This is another sort of Jackson self-inflicted wound. If we'd been a little faster to get our enhanced corrosion control, the faster we could take the disclaimer off. We are finishing those contracts right now. The last piece of that is happening at both water plants, where carbon dioxide is being put in place to be injected into the treatment system to control pH appropriately. We're controlling it in other ways. We've been controlling it. This is just what we put in the plan that was approved by the health department, by my friend here. No. And we just need to finish that and we can get rid of it. So a lot of confusion over lead in Jackson, a lot of misinformation. This is not Flint. Our problem has been not getting water to people, not poisoning people with the water.
Okay, we're going to
And-
take one more question. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to, but I think, the even broader point that you may be leading towards is once we start making infrastructure and physical reforms, how do we start? Which populations do we prioritize? Which areas do we begin in? And that's when we start looking at the populations who are most affected. We know that children consume more water per body weight in comparison to adults. So if there is anything harmful in the water source, they're disproportionately affected. Similarly with older residents or residents who are immunocompromised, our racial minority communities, they have fewer resources to seek alternative water options should there be a failure or drop of pressure in the water system. So we know which groups tend to be disproportionately affected whenever we do have problems with the water systems. And I say that and I do simultaneously agree with Ted that I think in Mississippi and with the Mississippi Department of Health, and I don't speak on behalf of them.
Not allowed to do that.
Yes, of course, but we do, MSDH does tend to conservatively err on the side of safety. So even if there's just a break in the pipe or a break in the system at some point, they tend to put out a boiled water notice, even if there's actually no tested samples of contaminants.
I have a question. On Beasley Road, there's this water pipe bust. It's been bust over like 10 to 15 years, and it's a whole lot of water. When you sit there, you could go down the street and just sit, and you could hear all the water just running. And I know it's been over 10 to 15 years, and it hadn't been fixed yet. I don't think we have no water problem. We have a governor problem. That's what we have, because we are part of Mississippi. Jackson is part of Mississippi, and the governor hates Jackson. Every time he goes somewhere, he talks about how bad it is in Jackson, and he's trying to take over Jackson. We don't have a water problem because we have a Jackson problem, a governor problem. That's what we have. Because all this time, that water been running for 10, 15 years, and they still hadn't been fixed as of today. I could go by there right now and park my car, and I could hear all the water. And that's waste. That's waste of water. And nobody hadn't done anything about it. They constantly talk about how bad it is in Jackson. And I live in Northeast Jackson. I could walk across the street, I'm in Ridgeland. I'll be in Ridgeland. That's just how close we are. So we don't have a water problem. We have a governor problem.
Well, as to that particular break, I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
We are going to get it fixed. It's a challenge. We haven't had the resources. We're lining them up. I found it back in September. Thought I'd found the holy grail of breaks, but learned that it had been there for a long time.
Right, and it's been over 15 years.
It's a nice sound in the summer, hear the water.
Okay, I really hate to kind of disrupt our really fluid conversation, but we're going to end today. I just want to let y'all know that Ted will give us an update on future conversations. So this was just the first conversation of many that are going to happen around the city of Jackson. So can you give us some closing remarks before I thank you both and then allow you to go to the press briefing next door?
Try to keep it short. Keep watch and looking for the community events that are about to come up. And again, these aren't going to be where you sit in the audience and listen to talking heads or just throw hard questions at me. To prevent that, we're going to put you around tables. You're going to have to actually do some work around this governance and rate question in groups, in small communities around tables, where we're going to try to get some really good feedback to help inform the ultimate proposal that we go forward with. So again, this is kind of community engagement, speed dating, because we don't have a lot of time, but we're trying to set up the structure that we can get the most information from the most people in the shortest period of time. And this is being recorded so that folks want to understand kind of what they're walking into in the community meetings. They'll be able to see these sessions, these recorded sessions, and understand they aren't going to be getting to ask the questions you've gotten asked today, and they aren't going to hear one distinguished and one person up here talking about water. They're going to be rolling up their sleeves and trying to help us get to community-based answers. So
And
that's
this
coming.
information will be on the website?
That'll be on our website.
Okay.
It's
Jackson?
jxnwater.com. Pretty easy to remember. And we'll also have other publicity going out. Again, as Lamees pointed out, I've got the Fahrenheit Creative Group as part of my team, and they do an awesome job. They're Jackson-based, and they will be getting that. They're helping develop these and get the word out about them.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to take a moment to thank our panelists today. We've enjoyed you.
Absolutely.
And then we also thank everyone here at Millsaps for joining us. And those of you in the community, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. And then y'all are free.
And we let you get away with that fluid pump.
I know.